So Liz Harman of Princeton University was recently in a discussion on a YouTube channel. And there's a link to that video in the description box. But her basic argument was that children in the womb aren't persons unless the mother wants them. And she made the argument that there comes a point in the life of the fetus where it does become a person, and that marker for her is when it has a conscious experience. So in other words, the child's moral status is not an intrinsic objective thing. It's only relative to the mother's will. And according to her argument, that would be true in the womb and not outside the womb, only because in the womb the child is not conscious or sentient and therefore does not have a will of its own. There's a problem with this argument, which I sum up thusly. The argument is that consciousness defines us as beings who are worthy of a level of moral consideration. If that's the case, then you're arguing for veganism. I would say that pigs are probably more conscious or sentient than infants and children in the womb. Yet it's perfectly okay to kill and eat them, right? So no, consciousness literally is not and cannot be the standard. Furthermore, if you're arguing that consciousness or sentience is the standard, then that would mean that abortion should be allowed until around 5 months. Because according to the research, that's when the child has its first actual pre-programmed conscious experience. Though perhaps you're arguing that consciousness marks the point which humans begin to have moral significance, aside from any kind of vegan framework. However, then the question becomes, why not consciousness as a moral marker categorically for all beings? You must then be placing a higher value on humanity itself, which then makes using consciousness as a standard an arbitrary standard, unless applied to all creatures. Therefore, if you're placing higher value on humanity, it must by necessity be rooted in something other than consciousness. And my question is, what would that be? Scientifically, we know that human life begins at fertilization, and scientifically, the child in the womb is living. It's obviously not dead. Scientifically, whether or not it's conscious is irrelevant, since as a human being in that stage of development, normal healthy development does not include consciousness. So not having consciousness at that stage is not a pathology. It's just the normal course of development at that stage. However, that doesn't change the fact that the being has a fundamental will biologically to live and to be conscious. Otherwise, it would not be working towards those milestones healthy end. And why is that? Because it has a conscious personal nature as a human being. Furthermore, it would seem that based on Liz Harman's position, it would be okay to kill infants also. Because developmentally, infants don't have a conscious will for quite some time. It would also be okay to kill many of the most severely mentally disabled. I'm also thoroughly confused how one can argue that a fetus's value is based on what the mother does, that it isn't a person with moral status unless the mother wants it, and not realize that she is arguing essentially for the foundations of slavery. Unfortunately, regardless of how unsound her arguments are, and make no mistake, her arguments are very unsound, they are sound relative to our current law, which allows abortion. But if the mother wants to keep the child is considered a person with rights that should be protected from harm from the mother, other than killing, of course, because that would be considered an abortion, but as well as attacks from those who might harm the mother as well. So, like I said, that video of her discussion with James Franco and Elliot, I forget Elliot's last name, but that's the link is in the description box. Go check that out, come back, let me know what your thoughts are, because I want to know if you think it's as ridiculous as I think it is. Like, share, subscribe, do all that, and stay tuned for more content.